So one of the questions that I actually received a couple of these is, how do I know if I'm on the road to healing from the trauma of emotional abuse? The couple people that sent it in, it was with respect to their marriage. How do I know I'm healing from the trauma? So that is a really good question. And the fact that you're asking that and the fact that you're here is so important and shows so much that you are on the road for one thing, right? So something that can happen is people um, aren't necessarily looking to kind of heal. They're like, this happened to me and I'm just going to move on with life. I don't want to look back. I don't want to think about it. There's different phases of healing that we move through. And after shutdown is exploration, or also you can be looked at as rebuilding. So in this phase is often when we are meeting new people and we are rebuilding our life, right? We're creating new community. Oftentimes we've had to get rid of a lot of people that are in our lives because they're connected to the person who was abusive. So we're in this rebuilding phase. And sometimes what happens in this rebuilding phase is that we stay there. So we enter into a new relationship, or without really considering how things, what kinds of things we need to look at in ourselves before we enter into a new relationship. And so when that happens, unfortunately, what can happen then is that you keep repeating the cycle. So one way to know that you maybe are not healing or you're not on the road to healing is if you are noticing the same patterns in your life. And it doesn't necessarily have to be relationships. It can be you're noticing the same kinds of patterns in all of your connections, right? So in your friendships and in your work and maybe in the relationships with your children, but you're noticing that you keep having the same kind of interactions. I'm curious, for those of you that are here live, who can relate to that, who feels like they are noticing kind of similar things happening over and over again. So for example, if in your relationship, you were someone that was always giving and never getting back from your spouse or from your partner, and then you're noticing that in your friendships, you're always the one giving. You're always the one reaching out and setting up. I see it, yeah, in the comment. You're the one that's always reaching out to your friends. You're the one making plans or helping them out, helping them move, bringing them food, whatever it is, right? So you're that giving personality. So if you're seeing those patterns, you notice those patterns, yeah, somebody else sees it too, right? You're noticing those patterns, and then you can ask yourself, how am I contributing to this pattern? How am I creating this pattern in my life? And you start making changes and you start noticing that other patterns in your life start changing, other connections in your life. So you may be stuck and you may not be healing if patterns are recurring and you're kind of confused about why, and you feel like things keep happening to me. That could be a sign that you are not on the road to healing. If you're seeing patterns and you're like, okay, I'm noticing patterns. How am I responsible for these patterns? Because we co-create our reality. And so if you're asking that question and trying to understand why those patterns are happening and looking for ways to make changes, then you know you're on the road to healing. And then if you are at the place where you are making changes and maybe some people are dropping out of your life, maybe you were the overgiver and the people who were only takers are now dropping out, then you know you're on your road to healing. And when you start seeing new people coming in, like, oh my gosh, now somebody else is giving to me, somebody else is reaching out to me and taking the initiative, then you know you're even further along in your healing. So that's one way. And as you can just see, it's a process, and it'll keep showing up in different ways in your life. Another thing to look for too, woohoo! I want to celebrate Sandra in the chat. She says, I have seen it, but I think it may be shifting. Yes, that's fantastic, Sandra. So that's definitely an indicator that you are moving forward and you are starting to notice these things and you're starting to shift within yourself, which is allowing you're healing, which is allowing these changes to happen. And then somebody commented, I'm noticing, but I have shut down. So the person who commented on that, if you would like to share more about that, we can dive into that a little bit. It can, I don't know if this is your case, but I will share something that can happen, is that when you notice the same patterns over and over again in your life, and then you're like, oh my gosh, people are always taking, and it becomes like crushing or overwhelming, and then you shut down because you're so sick and tired of people always taking, using the example that I was just using of being an overgiver. It might be something else for you, right? But that can cause you to shut down. So Galaxy, if you want to comment on maybe if that's why you've shut down or if there's something else that's happening for you. But that can be a good indicator. You're still in that shutdown phase and you need some support in order to be able to move into healing. So when you're in that shutdown phase, some of the things that you really need to do is start regulating your body, because your body is so stressed and overwhelmed. If you're in shutdown, then you may need to support yourself in these other ways, your nervous system, your body, your health, before you really have the emotional capacity and energy to be able to dive into the next phase, which is looking at your own responsibility. To go back to the first comment about how do I know if I'm healing, the other thing too that you can look at is triggers. So are you being triggered? So if you're like, well, no, this doesn't resonate with me, Veronika, I don't feel like I'm repeating these patterns. I feel like I'm just kind of cruising through life. It could be that you're suppressing things. So a way to know that you're just suppressing and ignoring things is you're getting triggered. So you have a really strong emotional reaction to something that shouldn't warrant that strong emotional reaction, right? So, or if you are feeling things like a lot of anxiety, you're anxious about meeting new people, you're anxious about dating, those kinds of things. So that's, again, our body's telling us that there's something inside that we've stored inside, that we've trapped inside, that we need to look at. So triggers is something that I talk about a lot in my programs, in my private work, as well as in my group program. Triggers are a really great thing. I have to laugh whenever I say that. It's great when we're triggered. It's a great thing to, triggers are great because we can use them as tools to understand what it is that we need to heal. So if you're feeling triggers pretty frequently, that's a sign that there's something for you to look at. Okay, I'm gonna take a moment and look at some of these comments. How do you handle healing if you don't have family or other support? Was brave and escaped out of abusive relationship, and it's me on my own. Was extremely isolating in that situation. Thanks so much for your worth. That's amazing to be able to leave when you're on your own. Yes, I understand that. I live someplace, I'm not close with my family of origin, as many of you know, and oftentimes when we're in these relationships, you can become very isolated. And by the time you leave, it's like you're completely on your own. So the healing process is, you said, how do you handle healing if you don't have family or other support? The healing process can actually be very self-focused, and sometimes actually, and we're going to dive into this in some of the other questions, sometimes our family and support can actually be detrimental because they may actually be part of the complex that has kept us, part of the system that has kept us in these abusive situations. So I know it's very difficult when you're alone. And so what I would suggest is one of the first things is to, of course, finding support through community, through people that understand you, right? So like things like this and support groups, either online, and finding that connection, because the connection is really important. It's one of the reasons I do group work, and actually even my private clients, we meet together as a group so that you can have that connection and that support. The one thing that I hear is that the connection with other people is what really allows you to really feel seen and heard, which is so important when you've experienced this kind of abuse. So seeking out, Lisa, seeking out those kinds of support groups, making sure that it's the kind of support that's healing. So we do not want to get stuck in commiserating, because that can really just cause us to keep being stuck in the pain. So finding the support that that is helpful to you, and then starting the process of building community. And I know that that is difficult, and it's a process, and it's a process. And part of that process is allowing yourself the space to be sad and to grieve that, right? Sometimes when we're in this healing place, we are so focused on, I want to be well. And we're like moving towards that. And what can I do to be well? And we want to be done with the negative emotions, right? How many people can relate to that? I am so done with feeling the things that I'm feeling. Pop in the chat, a hell yeah, if you are so sick of feeling the things that you're feeling, right? But sometimes we just need to say, hey, I feel sad. You know, I went through this when I rebuilt my community after I left when I left my marriage. And so we're so busy trying to get through that we forget that we need to grieve. We need to grieve that we're alone. We need to grieve that we've lost a community or never had that. And making new connections and rebuilding a community is a process. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So giving yourself the grace of time and saying, hey, I know this sucks. I know this sucks. And but we're going to keep working on rebuilding community. Lisa, things like Meetup was a lifesaver for me when I first left my marriage. I use that to meet. If you're not familiar with it, it's not a dating app or anything. It's just a way to meet people with similar hobbies. And I made basically all my new friends after my marriage through Meetup. So that's a great resource as well. I'm going to read this comment from Lisa because it's so important. Found that staying in online YouTube research mode is great for undoing the crazy making gaslighting from abuser, yet it can be a very unhealthy space with some perpetually repeating their pain. Yes, these videos can become a form of addiction. It is challenging to step away from these channels when they were a literal lifesaver at one point, and YouTube videos were more consistent and reliable than people in real life. Absolutely. Any thoughts about how to move out of the research phase when it has gotten so entrenched? Right? And it's such an important point that we don't want to get stuck in that place of researching and being in support groups, and we kind of get stuck in that loop. So earlier when I was talking about the shutdown and the exploration rebuilding, that's another way to get stuck in that exploration rebuilding loop. The best thing you can do is simply stop. And the way to move out of researching, when you're researching, where's your focus? Your focus is on the X. You're learning all about all the characteristics they have that make them who they are. You're learning about gaslighting. You're learning about all these things. So anytime your focus is on the X or on this, it doesn't have to be an X, right? And most people here it is. It can be a coworker. It can be friends, family members, right? When you're focusing on the person who hurt you, that's when you know that you're stuck in that loop, in that exploration phase. And what you want to do is shine the light on yourself. So start asking yourself, what caused me to want to be with this person? So this is not conscious, right? This is the exact same thing we're going to do with ruminating, by the way. What caused me to be with this person? So we did make a choice, probably not conscious. Who would consciously choose that kind of pain? We chose to be with this person, right? So I was married for 16 years. You know, we dated and then we got married. Then we had kids, then we got married. But at each phase along the way, I made a choice to stay. Often we feel trapped and we feel like we can't leave, but nevertheless, we did choose to stay. And there is some reason deep down that you chose to stay. So start getting really curious about what that reason was. And we'll talk about briefly about some of the things that you can look at to really understand that. And that is what I dive into in my group program, right? That we're going to be looking at that. What is what caused you to stay, and get really curious. And that shifts your focus from being in these online groups that are really focused on the behaviors of the other person, and start shining that light on yourself.